And I'm texting the coach. I'm like, hey, I'm taking off. I'm landing. All these other things, right? No response. Get to the school, um, and mind you, before I get there, he's telling me, he's like, yeah, I'll be in my office on this day. Everything else, like, yeah, we'll handle your stuff with the admissions, and then and then we'll sit you down and get you going. I said, okay. And I go through admissions. I even get the ID card, everything. And then I go to the athletic um, department, find his office, and I get there, and they're like, "Yeah, he's not in today." So I said, "Okay, I'm calling," and I called like 30, 40 times, and I'm like, "There's no way this coach just stood me up."
Join me, Jeremy Swick, on Into the Unknown, a podcast that delves into the personal journeys, stories, and experiences of individuals across diverse professions. As a historian by trade, I firmly believe that our personal histories shape our present and offer valuable insights into our paths ahead. With that being said, let's get into it. On this episode of Into the Unknown, I am joined with a very special guest, Jayson Jackson. How you doing today, man?
Doing good, brother.
Man, I thank you for taking the time to talk with me today. I could talk rugby all day.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Me too. Me too. 100%.
So, the way I love to kick off the show is just talk about the importance of networking and how are we connected, man?
Um, we connected through IG. I think. Are you familiar with Lance and Great American Rugby?
Oh, yes, I know Lance very well. I'm about to see him tomorrow, I believe.
Yeah. So I think that was kind of the connecting factor, because I remember seeing your guys's Instagram, like, collaborating a lot. So I was like, oh yeah, friend of Lance, friend of mine, automatically.
Oh, 100%. And, shout out Great American Rugby. Lance is the man. He was also a guest on this podcast. And again, more people talking about rugby is never a bad thing.
Oh yeah, it's never a bad thing. I remember when I was with Giltini when I was with Giltini's Academy, he gave me my first interview. So yeah.
I love it, man. So I also like to start off and just ask you that comic book issue number one, origin story. Who are you?
Who am I? Um, it's funny. I actually wrote a paper on this in my psychology class this summer. I think comic book origin story. If you could, I would say, copy a movie verbatim, but just change the sport, I'd say Invincible with Mark Wahlberg. Um, I wasn't a guy who grew up playing rugby. I had friends who played. Um, COVID, COVID happened, and it was just a matter of, okay, I fell in love with the game, and it was just okay. We found a passion for it, and then at some point, regardless of people may say, some of the people who support me, they say I've fought through things like gatekeeping and rugby, purists and things like that, as far as being a crossover athlete. But I simply think it's just perseverance, is just not taking no for an answer, being an underdog, and really showing people that this is also another part of what growing the game looks like. So
I love that you mentioned growing the game and being, I guess you could say, the more non-traditional rugby athlete, which has become a lot more, I think, frequent and widely known, especially in the United States, because it's not always a game everyone grows up playing.
exactly. Like, if I had this game at 12 years old, oh my goodness, but it was never exposed to me. Especially after learning the history of many clubs um, and traditions and things like that. Um, I've once, I remember one time there was only one mention of rugby, and that was because before LA Sevens, they had the Sevens in Las Vegas. Only reason why we heard of rugby out there was because when rugby came to Vegas, I went to high school out there, and I was like, why is everybody going crazy going to San Boy Stadium? And the only time that place was filled up, like, we used to make jokes because the only time they could fill that stadium was for rugby and not for the football team. So, um, and I saw some of my friends in high school. They would go to those events, and honestly, a big part. I think a big part that played in not sparking my interest in rugby was I also didn't see people on the field who looked like me. Um, being a not just being an African American, but also being an Afro Latino. Um, Afro Latinos, we see ourselves in soccer and baseball, um, even MMA. As an African American, we can go down the laundry list of sports that we see our demographics in, and I didn't really get hooked into rugby until I saw the Springboks, because I'm like, wow, so there's guys on the field that look like me. We're not from the same nation, but when I'm watching, the props like the Beast or Siu Kolisi, and then also understanding the political history of South Africa and the things that they've got, fought through together as a society, and to see how that team is such ingrained in the culture, I was like, wow, if they could do it, then we could do it too. So then I would look up things like Team USA, and um, I remember buying USA rugby hoodies before I even knew how to play, just because I was like, wow, this gear actually looks pretty cool. Um, and the only time I saw people who looked like me involved with USA rugby was either at the club level or in sevens. Um, Mind you, right? I remember when the MLR was in its early stages, back when the American Raptors were like still in the league and things like that. Um, because I used to have, I grew up in a very rough community, and in our community we had a large demographic of African Americans and Polynesians. So my Polynesian friends, they would be like, "Hey, Jason, man, if you played rugby, man, like, like we think you'd be pretty good because you're already playing tackle football with us at the park." And me being one of the smaller guys at the park with a lot of my Polynesian friends, they're like, "Hey, look, if you could already hang with us out here with no rules football at the park, I think you can handle rugby." And come to think about it now, I realized that a lot of them ended up playing for the Las Vegas Irish after we graduated high school. Um, but for but through my love for the game, I also wanted to help grow the game too. I felt like there was a responsibility with every level that I progressed to. It wasn't just about me. It was about, okay, how do we take this thing we're doing and make the most impact as possible.
So you said growing up you played different sports. When
Mhm.
did you finally decide that, okay, you had friends talk about rugby, you've kind of seen it, you had ideas, you even had the hoodie, but you hadn't stepped on the pitch yet. When did you decide to make that jump?
It was during COVID. It was during COVID. So you know, little life hack from high school to COVID. If you fast forward, we 1 year of junior college football, played half a year, couldn't afford school, had to leave, joined the army the next year, um, served 6 years in the U.S. Army California National Guard. My last 2 years of the Guard, by the way, for those military veterans watching this, I was a 19 Delta and 11 Bravo Cavalry Scout, then reclassed to infantry. Hua. Um, then was like, all right, now I have the money to go to school. So went back to school, played junior college football again at San Bernardino Valley College. We got a ring that year, went 9-1. Wasn't a star player of the team, but was a contributor. My stats were good. Was good enough to get, got a couple scholarship offers to some D2 and NAIA schools. But they were partial scholarships. And looking at the remaining balance of how much tuition I would have had to pay on top of room and board, one, I just simply couldn't afford it, and then two, I already I already had my daughter who's now 7, right? So she's at school right now. That's why it's so quiet in here. So at that point I was like, all right, well, I can only play locally if I want to keep playing. Um, the only reason why I wanted to keep playing football was because if I didn't use my GI Bill benefits, I could pass them down to my daughter, so she would have free college. So I was like, all right, like I'll go to work. I'll work these. At the time I was working like two jobs, 2 full-time jobs and a part-time on the weekends. And my coach can confirm on Friday walkthroughs before the game the next day. I'm getting off the graveyard shift, driving to the school, and we're doing morning walkthroughs while everybody else has their football shorts on and things like that, and just pads and shells. I have my pads, shells, and security pants with cleats on, with my security uniform underneath the top. And my coach looked at me and was just like, "Did you just get off work?" I was like, "Yes, sir." And he says, "All right, I love your commitment." And that's why he decided to bring me on as a student assistant coach the year after. Um, we won another ring that next year, so I was getting a jump start on my coaching career as well. Um, and it was also family ties because one of the coaches has been a father figure to me, and another one of the coaches on the team, he's basically been a family friend since I was 5. Because he coached my older brother in high school. COVID hits. I have a couple scholarship offers, and the only 2 schools that I could have possibly made it work was Humboldt State. I realized they have a rugby team, and then you have Azusa Pacific, who also has a rugby team. And one of my friends, he's Tongan. My buddy Benji, he was a linebacker at our school. He says, "Hey man, you should try rugby." And I'm just like, "Man, you sound like everybody else growing up." And you know, growing up here in the Inland Empire, and then I went to high school in Vegas in 2008 because the market crashed. But being back in California after that, growing up in the Inland Empire, you cannot play sports here and not be tough. You just can't. And it was Cinderella story, right? We play Citrus College in the middle of the season. That game is basically for the conference title. Azusa Pacific and Citrus College, the junior college, they both share the same field because Azusa Pacific University does not have their own football field. So the coaches, they're not even out there recruiting. They're just watching us play, and they're just like, "Can these guys hurry up and get off the field so we can start ours and play Western Oregon?" So we play them. I was told I played a very good game. Um, Coach gets on the bus and says, "Hey, is there a Jayson Jackson here?" My whole team looks at me and says, "Oh snap! This guy's about to get a scholarship offer." I walk to the front. I'm like, "Hi, I'm here." And he's like, "Yeah, I'd like to talk to you about your future at Azusa Pacific University." I am like, immediately, I'm like, "Coach, yes, yes, it's right down the street. I can raise my daughter, go to school, and all these other things." Right? COVID happens. They shut down their entire football program, and I'm just like, "Okay, got some money saved up for school. We can just nickel and dime it that way." Was getting work experience through not only my 9 to 5 jobs at night, but I was working internships in the day, building my coaching resume, just making sure everything else around my life was okay. My daughter was doing great in school. We put her in some of the best schools, which, by the way, she made honor roll for the 3rd year in a row. Um,
Awesome.
and really, it was about, okay, how do I pursue my dreams, goals, and aspirations while never abandoning my responsibilities and obligations. I was like, there's got to be a way to do both, right? And so many people have usually said, "Oh, well, you got to sacrifice this, you got to sacrifice that," and I said, "Okay, I'll sacrifice blood, sweat, tears, and time, but I think if we do this correctly, we could actually make something special." And I call my brother, and I'm like, "Hey, man, I don't know what I'm gonna do." And he says, "Well, look at the schools that you've been talking to, and I'll help you figure something out." I said, "Okay." So I looked at all the schools. I didn't have a Division 1 football clock. Otherwise I would have just walked on at Sacramento State. Coaches at Sacramento State were like, hey, we'd love to have you. We'll take you as a walk-on. So I go to the eligibility center, and because of my military service, usually your NCAA Division I clock freezes because you have 5 years to play for. Me going to the military, my clock froze. But because I spent a few years at the military, it was unfrozen, and I'm not knowing about this until I'm actually talking to the eligibility officer. We go through the entire process and do an appeal with the NCAA. I missed it by 1 year. My appeal didn't get approved. So I'm like, dang, I just missed. Like, all right, well, that sucks. And then there were only two schools um, that were D2 that I could afford. And as many people would say, well, Jayson, you're in California. You got University of Redlands right here down the street. And shout out to Coach Mariani, because I know you were on my tail recruiting me, and I love you so much. And I love the University of Redlands Bulldog community. And I spent a lot of my time in Redlands, and I love everybody a part of that community. I even have friends that went to that school. But I could not afford $55,000 a year. I just can't. And with the student loan debt crisis that's going on, I said, look, I already built my credit in the military. I'm not going to throw all that away to where now I can't use my VA home loan to go get a house. Like, okay, we got to, play our cards right here. So there were two schools: University of Texas Permian Basin, West Texas A&M University. I'm calling both schools. I'm like, hey, coach, you think I can walk on? And I'm coming in, and I'm just a humble guy, and I'm gonna earn my spot. UTPB, they didn't pick up the phone. This one coach, Hunter Hughes, he was the head coach at West Texas A&M University. He picked up the phone and said, and I would call, I would leave messages. I'm just like, man, like, I just need this guy to pick up one time. One time, he picks up, and I'm pretty sure he was tired of me leaving messages. And mind you, I had already applied to both schools, got accepted to both of them. Like, I'm already in. Like, both of these schools are like, hey, show up and get your ID card. And I'm like, but I'm just like, I can't go to these schools unless, like, I could walk on, but, for like a season. And knowing myself, I'm like, yeah, I'll earn a scholarship. I'll outwork everybody. And Coach Hunter Hughes was like, yeah, I'll take you as a preferred walk-on. So I was like, oh, most definitely. I said, yeah, coach, I'm actually going to fly out there to get some stuff done on campus. Do you think we could set up, a time where we could meet? And he says, sure, absolutely. We go back and forth on emails. I'm thinking everything's great. We have an open line of communication leading up to my flight that I'm taking out there. Mind you, this is Amarillo, West Texas. Okay. The airport's probably the size of my apartment complex. You get the rental, and it's just straight home on the range. And, I'm familiar with Houston, Dallas, Austin. I am not familiar with West Texas. So I'm looking around like, okay, I got this rental. I'd say one quick prayer, like, Lord, please don't let me get pulled over because I don't know anybody out here. And then two, please do not let me stop for gas in a sundown county, because I understand I'm in the South. So I'm like, all right, let's roll. Play some country music, because I'm like, hey, I don't want to attract attention to myself, because I'm looking like a straight California guy from the IE, right? Denim shirt, streetwear, and I'm just like, okay, let's roll these windows up and play some loud country music, and hopefully we can just blend in. We drive to the school. My brother helped me pay for hotel money. So I get to the hotel. I check in. Lady looks at me and she says, "You're not from around here, are you?" I said, "No." She says, "What you here for?" I was like, "For the school next door." She's like, "All right, cool." She's like, "You gonna play some football?" I was like, "Yeah." That whole Friday Night Lights football small town vibe. I was like, "Oh yeah, I'm liking this." And I'm texting the coach. I'm like, "Hey, I'm taking off. I'm landing. All these other things, right?" No response. Get to the school. And mind you, before I get there, he's telling me, he's like, yeah, I'll be in my office on this day, everything else. Like, yeah, we'll handle your stuff with the admissions, and then, and then we'll sit you down and get you going. I said, okay. And I go through admissions. I even get the ID card, everything. And then I go to the athletic department, find his office, and I get there, and they're like, yeah, he's not in today. So I said, okay, I'm calling. And I called like 30, 40 times. And I'm like, there's no way this coach just stood me up. And I'm like, maybe it must have been a mistake. Maybe he had to call out real quick because he had something to go handle. And I talked to the secretary. I'm like, hey, do you know if Coach Hughes is in today? Like I'm showing her text messages like, yeah, he said he'd meet me here and everything. And they're like, nah, he didn't come in at all today and didn't leave a message, anything. And I'm like, okay. So it's now 7 at night. I got an ID card for West Texas A&M in my hand. I'm pacing back and forth in my hotel room. And I said, you know what? All right, let's go get a bite to eat. We're just gonna stress ourselves out. I walk across, and there's like this little shopping center. And when I say shopping center, I mean like 5 stores. 5 stores and a stoplight. I see the police officers at the gas station. Like this is straight up something out of Varsity Blues, where I walk in, cops are like, "Hey, how's it going, son?" I'm like, "Going good, sir." They're like, "We haven't seen you around here before. You moved in?" I was like, "No, I was just trying to go to school here." I was like, "Do you know where I can get a bite to eat?" And they're like, "Yeah. Go down this block, hit a left. You should be good. There's a good cheeseburger spot. Right there. You can get a good cheeseburger and a good beer." And I was like, "All right, cool." Um, Come to find out, they were alumni from the school. They played football at the school. I'm like, oh yeah, this is real Texas right here. And I actually, got warmth for the town. I was like, I actually like it here. Like people are really nice. People will check you out at first. They're like, who's this city feller, walking around. But after they talk to you, they're just like, oh, okay. And then once they are like, oh, you're a military guy? All right, cool. Um, I go to the cheeseburger spot and I'm on my phone and I called my brother. I'm like, yeah, I'm on my way home tomorrow. He says, my mom's asking me how did it go, and I'm just like, I'm lying to my mom, right? I said it went great, you know. And then I tell my brother the truth, and I'm like, man, I think this coach just stood me up, bro. And I was so angry and sad because I was like, man, like I just want a chance to show my work ethic. I'm not asking for handouts. I'm not asking for anything. I'm asking for a shot, and it's funny because everybody who I've played, all my teammates who I've played football with, they've always held me in very high regard. And I was like, well, I appreciate that I have that respect for my teammates. And I'm just like, yo, man, these coaches don't. And I was really upset and I was getting cynical. And I said, you know what? I'm scrolling through Instagram, and by a random algorithm, I see this profile pop up and it says LA Mongrel. I'm like, hmm. I'm like, there's no sports going on. It's COVID. And nobody was even playing rugby union, I think. And I'm like, what is California Rugby League? So I looked at the Instagram page. Things looked organized. So I'm like, all right. And I'm like, you know what? Maybe that'll be a way for me to stay in shape for football. Little did I know that I would never go back to football after that. I get back to California. I send a text message. It's 80, Coach 80. Say, hey, man, yeah, come out. I was like, hey, Coach, I just want to come out and I see the things you're doing. I just want to come out and, like, I just want to have a shot. Like, I don't really know how to play rugby. And when he told me, he says, it doesn't matter if you don't know how to play. Everybody's welcome. Everybody's welcome. Like that in rugby, like people ask me all the time, they're like, hey, Jayson, you played in the Arena Football League. You played junior college football. Like you've been a part of that football grind. What makes you so attracted to rugby? I said, because rugby's a place for everybody. When I got introduced to rugby, it was very welcoming. Even years before I played it, it was still welcoming. And I'm like, wow. So I'm looking at certain things in rugby business like, hey, like you guys don't need to reinvent the wheel. Just hold the water out. We'll come drink it. It's just it's like a puppy. It's like it's got to earn your trust first. It's gonna dip. It's gonna back away from you a little bit because it doesn't know what this is. And it's like, oh wait a minute, we're nurtured over here. Granted, okay, people talk. Okay, granted, we don't play in stadiums in front of 50,000 people. Okay, in football, that didn't matter either. We're complete strangers to those people, and then the moment you lose, they turn on you anyway. Um, Relationships in football, there's only I can count on one hand coaches I still talk to from my football days. Us as athletes here in the States, we know once you get into college sports, man, these coaches do not care. I was fortunate enough to have junior college coaches who cared, but that was already through family ties. Because even then, I saw how some guys lower on the totem pole were kind of like, ooh, okay, if you're not making plays, you might start getting pushed to the side a little bit. As for rugby, I'm watching the same guy at a rugby club. Okay, this guy will probably only catch maybe 1 out of 100 offloads, but they still love him up the same. Um, doesn't matter whether you lose a game by 80 or win every game by 40. Mutual respect is there. Yeah, some guys get chippy, but the mutual respect is there. And so when I go out there, everybody's welcoming, and people, and mind you, at this point in time, I'm thinking rugby league and rugby union are the same thing. Okay, so I'm not even knowing the difference of codes yet. We play rugby league, and I'm loving it. Right, I'm loving the physicality. I'm like, oh yeah, I found my jazz. Right, I'm out here. Once I learned that, okay, bring that tackle a little bit lower, then I was like, all right. And I was creaming people, and the unit that we had that year was great. Even got to my first rugby fight that year, and I was like, I love all of it. Like, shout out to EPA Razorbacks. Like, I love these guys. Like, we're all family. Like, I talk to Tiger all the time. I talk to Fatai. Shout out to Lengy Lengy Hapakui. Glad you're healing up well. Shout out to Mona. Shout out to everybody with the EPA Razorbacks, because like we are literally family. Like whenever they go to a tournament, they're like, Jay, like hey, you trying to roll with us? I'm like, all right, let's go. And it's a big family, and they were my first rugby fight. Like, so like we're in the middle of the field. Shout out to Ronald. Like, I remember Ronald. I carried the ball. Ronald like kicked me in the face or something on the ground. I was like, yo, chill. Words were exchanged. Wham. And I'm just like, and mind you, I'm coming from football, so I'm like, okay, oh yeah, like I'm not, and mind you, everybody's kind of like, hey, there's a whole sideline of Toggins over there, like, don't do it, and I'm just like, nah, like, do you understand that, like, I'm from the Inland Empire, like, I grew up in a Polynesian and African American community. We grew up fighting, so I was like, all right, cool, boom, getting my first rugby fight. And then I'm not realizing that this isn't football, to where it's like, okay, we go back to the game, everything's fine. We ended up winning that game. And then afterwards, rugby, guys drink a pint together, things like that. Um, I'm nervous, because I see more people from their neighborhood pull up, and I'm just like, oh yeah, they're all making some good food over there, but I don't want to go get a plate and then have like 12 guys try to, jump on me. And I was like, man, okay, I'm gonna go get a plate anyway. I go get a plate. One of the guys, he taps me on the shoulder. I kind of flinch a little bit. I'm just like, wait, like, what's going on? And he says, hey man, like, great game today. He's like, hey man, just by the way, you know, all is well. It's just water under the bridge, dude. He's like, it's rugby, and I was just like, oh wow, that's different. Because in American football, we know they're waiting for you outside the locker room. Like, oh yeah, it's round 2, let's go. And I was just like, oh wow, like there is no hard feelings. Okay, cool. Because for me, in American football, I would always leave it there on the field, but then you have to keep your head on the swivel. And I was like, but nicest people in the world. I'm not used to that. I'm used to being in an environment where it's very confrontational and very gritty, and you can't show weakness. And in rugby, I was like, wow, you can actually just be yourself. And that's what made me want to play rugby league. And then afterwards, that's when I found out the difference between rugby league and union. That summer of 2020, many of us were playing rugby league, but how I got introduced to rugby union was through Eagle Rock Rugby Club. because half the rugby league team was Eagle Rock guys. So they're like, hey, you should come play with us. Shout out to Emiliano and the Banditos, because he was on the team at the time. This was before he started Banditos. And he's like, you should come play for Belmont. And I said, who's Belmont? And everybody's like, what? You don't know who Belmont Shore is? And I'm just like, geez, like, my bad. Like, I don't know. They're like, we're the best. I'm like, okay. I went to one Belmont Shore practice. No, it wasn't even a practice. It was like a Saturday, like, touch session. And Emiliano was great. Some of the guys out there who were there, who I have a good relationship now, like, yeah, we're cool. But I think when I went out there, the vibe was a little bit different. It was one of those things where it's like, if you don't know how to play rugby, we're not going to waste our time to teach you. Like, you better get up to speed or get out the way. And, I'm having fun playing touch rugby. And then some people were just looking at me like, who is this guy? And I kind of felt like, I was like, okay, maybe I don't belong here. Because people saw my size and they're like, oh, wow, let's try to recruit this guy. But then when they realized I didn't know how to pass, they were like, oh, no, never mind.
Well, I don't know if we want to recruit this guy.
Yeah. And there were two guys who I saw out there. Well, no, four guys who were out there who I'm good friends with now, who were very nice to me. Emiliano was one of them. You had Ben, who's been Belmont's captain for a while. Long hair, scrum cap, usually plays number 8. He was very nice. Great relationship with him now. I will follow him into hell if there's a rugby game there. Great captain. He was nice because he was also a football guy. He played in Germany and all these other places. And most people actually don't even know that about him, is that he was a superstar in overseas American football. And then he was just like, I like rugby more. And then there were two other guys. One name was Mafi. Now, if you know Belmont Shore Rugby, you know the name Mafi. Big old Samoan prop. And I would see everybody pointing at him like, oh, man, there's Mafi, this and that. I'm just like, what's the big deal? He's huge, but I'm like, what's the big deal? And then somebody showed me highlights, and I was just like, oh, my goodness. I said, okay. Like, it was scary. I'm like, yo, like, this guy's hitting people like Troy Polamalu, but he's a 300-pounder. And he's got speed, too. I'm like, okay. So I'm like, okay, in rugby, we can't be out here playing because we're gonna get hurt if we don't really lock in. And then there was one person out there, sandals, shorts, nothing crazy, wasn't dressed all bougie, and everybody kept pointing at him. And I said, who is that guy? Like, is that somebody's like uncle, grandpa, or something? They're like, nah, man, that's Areni IE. I'm like, who's Areni IE? People are looking at me like, oh, I'm like, dude, I don't know rugby. I don't know who this guy is, but because I was raised correctly, I respect everybody. When I walk into a room, hello, sir, hi, how you doing? Shake hands, look people in their eye, those type of things. Here at the Inland Empire, we're very big on respect. So and as a culture here in the Inland Empire, our grit is what gets us through life. Many of us have to drive far distances for jobs. Many of us have to almost rebrand ourselves to where we don't make other people feel uncomfortable when we walk into a room. They're like, who are these rough around the edges people? But here in the Inland Empire, we understand each other, from the white collar worker to the blue collar worker. Even the guys in our corporate sector who work white collar jobs out here, they're perceived a different way when they go to LA or San Diego or Orange County. It's like, no, life is not easy over here. And you drive another 20 minutes, you're in the high desert. Nobody knows who we are until we usually take that drive to the bigger cities. And I get introduced to Eagle Rock. They say, hey, you should come play sevens. I said, what's sevens rugby? They're like, oh, you'll love it. You're already in shape playing rugby league. I'm like, okay. We go out there. I'm like, oh, okay. So the first tournament was Oasis in San Diego. So I see Ombak. I see Belmont Shore for the first time. And I'm like, what is this big deal with these Belmont guys? Like everybody's just in street social terms, everybody's glazing these dudes. So I'm like, okay, like who? I want to see what the big fuss is about. Because now I'm getting because I'm starting to get better at this sport. Right now, I'm getting tired of hearing these dudes. Right, I see Emiliano over there. I'm like, oh hey, what's up? He says what's up to me, and then when I see the Belmont guys kind of like walk in, oh they walked with their heads high, chest out. They they knew they were coming to win that turn. Like they knew they were going to win that tournament. Like the confidence level was there. And then I realized that every other rugby club here hates them. But I'm like, okay, me as a, like me as a competitor, I'm like, okay, yeah, when you're the best, everybody's gonna hate you. But I'm like, wait a minute, everybody's like trying to like every time somebody plays Belmont, they try to throw a little bit extra on it. So I'm like, yo, what's the deal? Like, there's got to be some history behind this. The way you guys feel about these guys, and people were telling me they're like, oh, Belmont. The reason why they always have a good team is because they poach all the best players from around the area, and then they say the club is the best and all these other things. So I'm like, oh, okay, so recruiting. Um, but also seeing their youth rugby system, it's like, okay, you guys need to relax. Like they have a full system going on over there. You can't be mad at them for being um, advantaged as far as a recruit as a talent pool when they are probably one of the only successful youth rugby clubs in the LA area. Shout out to Santa Monica. That's why they're good rival programs. Because those kids are going to see each other. Um, but I saw that Belmont had 3 teams. I'm like, what is this? I'm like, Ombek has 2 teams. Belmont's got 3 teams. This team from Arizona, they're called Tempe Rugby Club. They just drove all the way out here. I'm like, oh, so this is a big deal. Like, what is this? I'm seeing somebody set up a camera. I'm like, hey, y'all made this seem like it was just Sunday League rugby. What is this? You guys know I'm not like good at this whole 7 stuff. Now I'm about to get exposed on camera. And then and then this guy named Jason Raven. I think a little bit of history about him. I think he was a former USA Sevens rugby guy. He was our Sevens coach at the time, and he says, "Look," in his specific voice, he says, "Look, man, you're an athlete, right?" I'm just like, "Yeah." And he says, "Look, man, believe in your talent, you know, and the pass you've been working on." He says, "Look, if you can't get that far, make sure the guy's closer. If you're not comfortable in that pass, then just run it straight." He says, "You know how to play the ball on the ground." He's like, "You know how to pick it up, right? And you know how to run. Just use that, and then build off of that every day." And I said, "Okay." We go out there, and I'm wrecking havoc, right? I'm wrecking havoc on defense. But I'm tired. I'm like, wait a minute. Ooh, it's been 5 minutes, and I'm like, what's? There's no, there's no stoppage. Everybody's going from side to side. I make one tackle, ball's gone. I gotta get up and go get this guy over here, and I'm just like, my brain is just being scrambled. And I remember one time I made a play that day, and I saw some people on the sideline laughing, and my teammates were clapping. They're like, "Hey, great job!" And then I saw some people laughing, and I was like, "What's the deal? Why are they laughing?" And then one of my friends was like, "Yeah, they're I think they're teasing you." And I was like, "Why?" He was like, "Because you're out here playing sevens and you weigh 287 pounds." And I'm like, "Okay, and I just chased down the guy that weighed 160." They're like, "Yeah, that's just it. That's why everybody got quiet." And I was like, "Oh, okay." So then I started to have a chip on my shoulder because then it seemed like there were people who were very welcoming, right? Like the grassroots people, the people who I would say necessarily it's more about the love of the game and not necessarily winning every cup. But then in that environment, you're gonna run into those teams or people who only care about winning. Like, yeah, they of course they love rugby. Yes, they love the game. But if you're not talking about winning, they're like, get away from me. That's when I, started to meet those people, and I'm like, okay, all right. And we're at another practice. We're at a league practice in Gardena. Mafi shows up, and he's got his Giltini's Academy gear on. from their first inaugural academy season. He was like a celebrity. Like he walks up. We're like 20 minutes of the practice already. They're like, "Hey man, look, that's Muffy." Like this is playing out like a Disney Channel movie. Like Johnny Capohala back on board. Like Johnny Tsunami. Like, hey, dude, those are the kids who ski. We snowboard. Like, you know what I mean? And that's when they're like, oh, rugby union, they got academies and all this stuff, and we're the rugby league guys. Like, so we're the snowboarders, they're the skiers who are on the fancy side of the hill. And I'm asking 80, I'm like, hey, what's going on with this whole union league stuff? And he says, 80, he will tell you to this day, he says, I cannot stand rugby union. And I'm just like, why? And that's when he taught me the history of rugby league and rugby union.
That was another fun episode of Into the Unknown. I truly appreciate you taking the time to listen. And if it provides you any value or entertainment, I would love if you shared it with others, liked, subscribed, and really just help the podcast grow. Again, tell a friend, tell a foe, just anyone who might enjoy hearing some stories of people's own journeys and what got them to where they are today. Till next time.